Cameron, here we are with the Pamela Whitlock Memorial Acquisitive Award, a painting by Elena Churilova called Wild Swans, Bejewel, Weir. I was immediately attracted to this work on stepping into the room. I have to say it's so vibrant and lively, and as you get closer to it, the execution of the paint is also interesting and lively. How did you approach the work? What did you think?
What was immediately apparent to me was how she'd rendered this reflection really well, and that's really hard to do, to capture mood in an image. I think the swans particularly are better seen from farther away.
Yeah.
In this work, but I really do like how she's rendered the reflection. It's reminds me of sort of Constable-esque kind of application there.
Yes, it's a real tour de force in terms of executing oil paint, isn't it? With just about every technique. She's used quite thick impasto, perhaps a palette knife up there, and then, as you say, the smoother areas which perhaps have been wiped over with a rag or a finger to get that effect. And I like the way there's the transparency, that you can see the depths of the water down there, and then the livelier surface. So
and obviously she's layered here through here.
Yeah.
Quite large, quite thick through here.
Yep. It's quite a tactile painting.
Yes.
It's got an impact that's visual and also tactile, and the theme itself is very appealing. You know, it's a wild environment, very attractive.
You can see right here she's taken it right back to the canvas here to reveal that sort of grid-like pattern on the back of on the body of the swan.
Yes, using the texture of the canvas and here with the back of the brush, point of the brush.
So there's a lot going on, but I think your eye is also drawn right through that horizon line too, which sort of glows out through there as well.
Yeah, attractive work and nice to have in the collection.
Very much so. So we're standing in front of Veronica Zield's work, Black Forest, Black Summer. What's your initial reaction to this, Sue?
It's a very striking piece, isn't it? Because of the black and white coloration, it just stands out. It's very stark, and the backdrop, the sort of scroll, it's almost like an altar cloth in a way. I said at the opening, it reminded me of a votive offering, some sort of ancient civilization that they're offering.
Offering up skyward.
Yes, offering up skyward and offering up gifts to the savage gods, who of course did assail us earlier this year with the terrible bushfires, and that sort of ominous theme, I think, comes through.
Summer of 2020.
Yeah, that's it. Yes, and the sort of scorched impression on the vessels, which, as we were just saying, look like pottery but probably aren't, some other kind of synthetic material. Very striking piece. To me, it has a tension between being very contemporary and then having those ancient overtones, which gives it a nice tension.
Because they've got a sort of a rustic, almost like a raku kiln-fired kind of look to them, like they've sort of been sort of fired in the earth in a way, but we think that potentially there's layers of paper potentially built up to emulate either a ceramic or a pottery kind of look, because when you pick them up, which you're not allowed to, they're quite light and buoyant, so there's kind of that play between the darkness of the fire as well as the buoyancy of that material too.
Yeah,
so sort of water and fire playing together.
Water and fire playing together, that's right, the elements. And it's a piece that's got a strong visual impact, but it also gives you plenty to think about.
So this is a work by Catie Hovel. What did you think of this when you first came into the gallery?
Oh, just so charming, really delightful work. So pretty to look at and interesting. There's so much detail in it, and confident too. A confident work for a young artist. It's got a kind of Tales of the Arabian Nights quality about it, with this sort of fairy tale setting of plants and animals and girls who all seem to be the same character. I wonder if it's a kind of self-portrait of Catie herself. Very charming and lovely work, and skillful too, I think.
The other thing I like about it is from a sort of construction point of view, from the thought around how she did it, is almost like a collage, essentially.
Yes.
It's in a collage sort of form.
Yep.
So you can see she has added a few things over the top.
Yes, there's texture here, isn't there, and sort of
so
wool.
You can often see places. A lot more into it. And I wonder whether having the glass on top has impeded some of that a little bit. But it's really interesting, and you often see there's some more detail there that just sticks right out once you get a bit closer. Yeah. So this work, I think, is like compared to the other works. If you're much closer up, you see a lot more detail than if you're a little bit farther away too. So she's really captured, I think, sort of a slice of Asian sort of culture there, I think, as well, which is really interesting.
Yep, lovely. C. Clifford's little painting, Harbour City, which is a cityscape of Gladstone itself, of course, took out the major award in the easel work section. I found it an attractive small work that in many ways is a painting about light and colour as much as it is about the city itself. And she's done a lot with, I think, a quite restricted palette of greys and mauves, and contrasted with greens and a little touch of soft pinky red in there.
I think it's quite an intimate portrait, and particularly when, this year particularly when there's been a lot of, from my kitchen window, from my balcony, from my those kind of things. So it does fall into that kind of category as well. So and also she has sort of stratified the landscape through to the sea as well, which is really lovely. Yep. So I think if you're from that view, you can sort of see right throughout. So there's quite a nice perspective in there as well, which is really lovely to see. And
a nice contrast between the hard geometric elements, the almost triangular and quadrilateral and cylinder forms and so on of the built environment, with the more free form and organic vegetation.
So what about this work? This is an Andrea Chapman creation, which won the Gladstone Regional Council award. What did you think about this when you first came into the room?
It's a very striking work, isn't it? And a strong concept-based and also drawing-based work. She's gone to a lot of trouble to think about the placement of the sails and the figures and so on. And even though it's loosely painted, the underlying drawing structure is quite strong and carefully worked out, and the centre of the composition is the centre point of interest really too, with these folk discussing how they're going to win the race.
There's a lot of action happening here, a lot of preparation going on, this chap or lady here. There's lots of sort of intimate moments between people in the portrait as well.
Yep.
And combining that love that we have here in Gladstone of the sea and of the port and that kind of culture, I suppose. It does sort of capture an essence of that as well.
It does. Nice, lively work.
So this work by Wendy Mcneal, Carnival of Flowers. What did you think of this?
Well, it is a work that stands out on the wall, doesn't it? It's got a strong presence and a lovely feel about it that takes you to another worldly kind of place, I think, like a kind of paradise sort of scene. Lots of strong rhythm and repetition throughout the work, and a nice feeling of movement in the sky.
I quite like how she's rendered, particularly the sky, almost like sort of a land strata in a way, that she's going to continue through into the sky.
Gives it movement, doesn't it?
It does give it movement, and there's lovely application of the dots in the sky. Yeah. It is really lovely too.
Yeah, and presumably these are native plants.
These are all native
plants. Yes. So a quiet celebration of the natural world and Aboriginal spiritual connections with the natural world as well. Lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely how it's gone right from the earth to the sky, which is quite nice too. And I like how she set it in two panes as well.
Yeah.
I think that adds a bit to it as well.
Yeah, and no people in it. It's a sort of primordial wilderness that existed before we were here, and
it's a portrait of plants.
That's it.
Yeah. So this is Irene Sparks' work. I love what she's done. There's a really delicate play between kind of the light and the dark of this work. And the detail is, especially from here down, is just absolutely immense. Talk us through this work, Sue.
It's a really masterly example of watercolour technique, I think, in her control of the washes and the drawings and so on. And in some ways you approach it thinking it's a conventional scene, but it's not actually. There's a lot in it that's entirely invented and imaginative, like these quite large birds who are almost like hills in the design, and then they are covered with a decorative pattern of leaves and so on, and there's a strong patterning that runs throughout the work and quite a disparity in scale of all of these birds and things. And
like these, this is probably my favourite part here, these sort of
butterflies
or mosquitoes or something coming out of the water. Drawn with really amazing precision, really good accuracy, and between the wash and the accuracy on top, that sort of multi-layered approach gives it a real strength but a depth at the same time.
A lot of control in this work, a lot of very fine lines that require a lot of dexterity with the brush, a lot of patience to get it right. And of course, with this kind of work, once you make a mistake, that's it really.
So I wonder how many drafts she had before that.
I wonder how many goes there were with it. Or I suspect she's someone that's been doing watercolour for a very long time. But it's very fresh, isn't it? It's a very fresh and appealing work. Very lovely.
So this is Andrea Pereira's work, Persephone. Talk us through this work, Sue.
Persephone is an interesting story. I actually did a series of works myself about Persephone, who is the Greco-Roman goddess who is abducted. Is it Hades? I forget that detail. Is it Hades?
Maybe,
Hades. Anyway, he's the god who abducts her and takes her underground. And while she's underground, we have winter, and then she's released to the surface, and we have spring. And so there's an allusion to that with the flowers and so on, and the pomegranate, of course, is significant in the story. And I imagine that these are meant to refer to the ram's horns. So there's a sort of feeling about Pan, perhaps, who's a figure that appears in a lot of Greco-Roman mythology, but a very interesting subject to tackle, and just adds a whole lot of other conceptual interest to what would otherwise be a straightforward figure study, wouldn't it? You know?
Yes. I do like the colours she's used, particularly these ones here, the ones that run down, getting any kind of glaze to stick and to go where you want it to go is a real skill, because you're doing it essentially blind in a way. I love how she's created these lovely pools as well, both in the head and in the chest. I think that's a really lovely touch. And
very mysterious, the way you can just see the lower part of her face, the chin and the mouth there. Lovely work. So we're looking at Mel Oakley's work called Physical Distancing, which is a hand-cut collage on board, and it took out the major Martin Hanson Memorial Award for this year. A very strong work conceptually, visually and technically. I think in just about all areas it gets top marks for me.
I think what I enjoy the most is with the precision with which the items have been cut. Whether from journal books, from encyclopedias, potentially she's used some sources from the internet, and really created a combination of both original prints and copied, and then sort of arranged them. I think she said she'd arranged this in quite a hurried fashion. She usually takes a lot longer to work on works. So this is a result of quite a shorter time frame than she's used to, but I think the effect of the colour at the top and the darkness at the bottom works quite well as a good response to a year like this.
Yes, when our world really has been turned upside down, hasn't it?
Yes.
And it's got a nostalgic feel about it, hasn't it? None of these are really contemporary, I don't think, these images of Australia. It's a way we used to be, and we're probably never going to be quite the same as we were. It'll be a different world from now on.
So in a way, it's sort of looking back on what we've had and what's at stake, essentially.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is really interesting.
Yep.
And everything upside down. There's been a lot of people in the show tilting their heads to try and see around the other way, almost like you would do at a library to see the side of a book or those kind of things. So there's a bit of potentially a bit of play that she's put into that work as well, as well as being the meaning behind the upside down world. So that's a really interesting thing to watch people try and
and more colour up there, as if our world has become a bit drained of colour and a bit grey, and it's all a bit subdued nowadays, isn't it?
And a nice sort of distance between the two of them, a nice bit of breathing room in between. Hope and possibilities, even though that's sort of the night sky potentially.
And I think even though, as you say, it's a sort of intuitive composition, it's not too formal, she's considered the scale fairly carefully. She must have gone through hundreds and hundreds of sources to select these things, because they do work in terms of giving you a sense of perspective and distance and so on. And things are different, but overall it's got a unity. All the little parts do work together and so on.
You're right, there's not a lot that's not at scale, apart from the ones which is obviously where she's talking about, where she's making a statement around that, but the sort of background, the buildings, those kind of things, they're all to scale. Yes, and an inventive work, an original and inventive work that's not really like anything else in the competition or that you would often see. Now, these two artist books by Doug Spowett and Victoria Cooper took out the first and the third awards in the Works on Paper category. What did you think of Victoria's work, Cameron? I think it's a very lovely sort of intimate look at these subjects here of space and earth and kind of our kind of awareness and observations of them. I think the rendition of the production is really lovely.
It's beautifully designed, isn't it?
With these spaces in between.
I love the typography in it.
I mean, it's clearly done this before, and it's quite a lovely.
Isn't that lovely?
You can sort of see across the probable improbability.
Yeah, very poetic work, that one.
What were your thoughts on Home?
Well, I thought it was a very deserving winner of the category, and apparently the photos were taken during an artist residency, and they're a mixture of self-portraits and kind of contemplation of solitude and aloneness, and then landscape comes into it, and the images hover a bit between representation and abstraction. So again, it's another subtle work that's about conceptually where we are.
It's a lovely portrait without being able to see the sitter.
But that sense of solitude and confinement and so on. And I've been on the road for a few years and stayed in many homes, none of them my own. So there's a story in there as well, almost like scenes from a film, I think. But
like a storyboard sort of as you would go through.
It's quite a moving and poignant sort of work. It almost looks like a Buddha figure there, doesn't it?
And again, the production and the quality of the book is very strong as well.
Yes.
All hand sewn together.
Yes, beautiful images. Very thoughtful work. It's that sort of liminal state of being, isn't it, between day and night, and being present and not present, thinking about things.
I think this quite illustrates it quite well. It's sort of the fog of ambiguity, between those two worlds. It's not sort of light or dark, it's sort of in between.
Yep.
But there's a definite darkness to it in a way.
Yep.
And a sort of an artificiality with that light as well, because it's not a natural light, compared with the natural environment around that they've superimposed or the reflection across on. So
Yeah.
there's those two things pulling against each other.
Yeah.
Natural, artificial.
Yeah. And they're masterly photographs, aren't they,
Very much
from
so.
someone
Very
who's
much so.
obviously practiced for many years.
It'd be great also to see the other photographs that have been taken around the same time
Yeah.
as well, to see what else has been captured.
Yeah. It works very nicely as an artist's book, I think, in the placement across the pages and so on, but it could work as an exhibition or as a film.
Absolutely.
You know, so, yeah.
What do you think the words add to the story as well? I know often that works will speak for themselves in a way.
Yeah.
What do you think that adding the words on top adds to
Well, it makes it a book, doesn't it? It makes it a story in a book, and the words give you something else to think about and contemplate, and particularly with that one where the words have been taken from philosophical texts, I think, so that there's that other layer to think about.
Yeah. No, beautiful, very beautiful.
Yeah.
And very deserving.
Yep.
So this work, MidSummer Meltdown, you can kind of see their name coming through in the application of this work. It does look like it is sort of melting out. You can see that it's sort of melted away at the bottom there. What was your response to this?
Oh, look, I thought this was tremendously inventive and original. I've rarely seen a fabric work tackle such a strong concept as this. It's something that you'd expect to see in a painting, really, the interior of a car looking out onto a landscape, and quite challenging to achieve in fabric, I think, and really well done, and a lovely sense of line, of drawing with a sewing machine, as it were, and of colour, those sort of all these inky colours.
Brush.
Not easy to achieve something like this at all, and it's very interesting, and grabs your attention, and you do wonder what's going on. And
also, and again, another view from a place, so like a view from the kitchen, a view from a lounge, a view from a car.
Again, that
so
confinement.
That confinement through again.
Which is almost unconscious, I think, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of a fantastic detail right through this top here, this blue sort of see-through
gauzy kind of
gauze material, and you can see that it's been edged really, really intricately, almost with a kind of a frill, almost somehow with a particular kind of stitch.
Yeah.
There's this huge complexity going on through, especially through this top part.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can't see it as much because this is quite a bit darker down here, but the construction is, this is hundreds and hundreds of hours of work.
Yes.
And even if you may not like it, potentially, you can still appreciate, I think, the effort and the quality.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't have to personally like things or want to hang them on our walls to appreciate the abilities that have gone into them. Yeah.
I even think, as you were saying, the perspective is also really interesting. You do feel like you're in the car.
Yes.
As well on that journey through. With all those other, all these trucks coming in on the top.
And of course, inside the car is very dark, and outside is so bright, isn't it? That's a phenomenon of Queensland, I think, where the light is just so strong.
So strong and
outside.
striking. So this work by Carmen Beasley Drake, it's sort of polarising in many ways because it sort of divides. You could almost argue it was a political divide between sort of blue and red, with the blue and red cars here, but also it's divided country as well, potentially. There might be some added meaning in there. What did you think of this work?
Very interesting, very inventive, I think, in the treatment of space. It's really tilts that whole landscape forward to us, doesn't it? It's not a conventional perspective, it's almost an Eastern perspective. It's both sophisticated and naive in a way. The little tiny cars and kangaroos and so on are almost naive, but this is very sophisticated abstract mark making in here, and a lot of interest visually, I think, in the contrast between the watercolour and the collage elements and so on.
Because you're right, the perspective is not potentially photographic, for example, but it has been peeled back to perhaps send your eye through to those top parts.
Sort of like Chinese or Japanese ink painting, I think, where it's not Western perspective, truly, but the background is tilted forward on the picture plane. But interesting. Wide open spaces. Maybe we read a bit into that in this particular year that we're living in, but it's also a typical local scene. That's the other thing to say about it, of this region.
You'd like to think that optimistically this is the end of our COVID journey, just over the hill, potentially.
Hopefully, yes.
That may have been subconsciously in the mix. I'm not sure whether we're reading too much into that, but you could potentially. But there's beautiful colours and details through here.
Yes.
Really good mix of styles as well. Almost in a little way like a painter's palette, where you'd have multiple colours out to test those kind of things, but they've been used in the application, which is nice. And then I like the subtlety of just some quite simple shapes and paths in the hills as well. Is quite lovely.
Which are a little bit Eastern too, in a way, like very calligraphic making and so on.
And then just the plain sky beyond. Which is a really nice touch, and then this is kind of a nice touch just popping off onto the road too.